Our first speaker is the CEO and principal partner of SGS Economics and Planning. Alison Holloway has provided public policy and strategic urban and transport planning advice to governments in Australia, New Zealand and North America. SGS were the first people that I saw that used the 2006 census data to really drill into this issue of gender equity in work and the growth areas. And it was a piece of research that absolutely hit me in the face. I've been using it ever since. SGS and Lucy down here have updated this data for this project with the 2016 census, and you'll find a summary of that data in this little report on your table. But they also have a spreadsheet that with a lot of detailed data, and if you contact the team that are on your tables at some point in time, we can give you those. But in the meantime, let's hear a little bit about that research from Alison Holloway.
It's really great to be here to share some of this research with you all today and to really progress this work that Whittlesea's really picked up and is leading. So SGS works with governments to understand places, communities and economies and to shape the future. And I think this work that we've been doing with Whittlesea really has stopped us in our tracks a little bit and said, hold on, we haven't known all this stuff as much as we've needed to in the past. So one of our services is about getting informed with critical insights from data, spatial analysis and research. And it's some of this research that I want to just touch on a little bit with you all here today. And I particularly want to acknowledge Lucinda, who's here, and Emily, who's on this table, who did a lot of this research and detail in the team. So as Jeanette mentioned, we know that our growth suburbs on the edge of our metropolitan cities, and this is not just a Melbourne issue, we see it nationally, are far away from the employment hubs of the inner city. And addressing the lack of employment and inequality has been a focus of public policy. And we've seen that in Plan Melbourne. It was, being acknowledged, this issue of the uneven growth and less access, and the complex drivers that have led to it, and a complex understanding of how these issues play out. But despite this, there's been very little analysis of this lack of employment opportunities and what it means by gender. So how uneven is this access to jobs, how it impacts men and women differently. Caroline Perez's 2019 book, and the cover is there on your tables, Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men, speaks to what happens when we forget to account for half of the community. It showcases what happens to women living in a world built on data when things go wrong. And I read this book after I had done this research, and it just resonated so much in what we do. And I was actually involved in the team doing work on Plan Melbourne, and it's such different insights that this work brings in understanding the city, looking at it by gender, because when you combine the data, you lose all the information about what's actually going on. So the data that I'll share with you today is an evidence base behind what's a very real personal story, and the video brings some of that story in for many in the community. So, we've got the data and we've got the evidence, but that's nothing without the stories and the real lived experience. So for me, this work also raises questions about what else is hidden, what else don't we know about in the work that we do as public policy professionals because of a data bias. So let's have a look. We've built an interactive website that the team at Whittlesea will share with you, and it brings together analysis not only for Whittlesea but for all local government in Melbourne, comparing inner areas with outer suburban and growth area LGAs. We've based it on ABS data, and we looked at a range of indicators by both location and by gender across employment patterns. So there's a lot more detailed work behind it, but there was two particular indicators. And the first one of those is around the relationship between skill levels and occupation of employment. So it gives an insight as to whether people with qualifications are working in occupations that match their skills. So are we getting the most out of what people have got to offer by matching their skills with the jobs that they're doing? So these results varied significantly spatially and by gender. Women are in jobs that don't require their qualifications, and this represents a real missed opportunity. We looked at the proportion of women and men with tertiary qualifications and that were employed in skilled occupations by each LGA. So what we found was that while women were more likely than men to have tertiary qualifications, they were less likely to be employed in jobs that reflected that level of qualification. And this was more pronounced in growth areas than in the inner city. So it's worth noting that there was also a mismatch for men in growth areas compared to inner areas, but it was less pronounced than for women. So, for example, in Wyndham, 35% of women in full-time employment who had a bachelor degree or higher were not employed in a skilled occupation. So that's 35%. And for men, it was 29%. In Port Phillip, so an inner city LGA, the figures were 20% for women and 16% for men. So this important understanding that Melbourne is not one place and that it doesn't work the same for men and women is really so critical in understanding how the city works. And you know, when we embarked on this work, we knew anecdotally it's an issue, but I don't think, we were quite shocked internally within the team at how much the differences did play out. So this map here shows the data for women, and I'll just toggle this, and that's the pattern for men. So if you just focus on the map, see the trends, how they go out spatially for men and then for women. So if you imagine in things like Plan Melbourne, where we're just looking at what's happening across the city overall, you actually miss that meaning of what's actually going on. We also looked at the relationship between the levels of qualification and income. So tertiary qualifications are often assumed to be a way to gain more secure employment and higher earnings, and we wanted to see if that translated into higher income for men and women and whether it varied spatially across Melbourne. We identified that the proportion of women and men in each LGA earning less than the median income and had a bachelor degree or higher qualification. So again, if we look at Melton as an example, 44% of women working full-time with the tertiary qualification were earning less than the median income. So that's 44%. And for men in Melton, it was 32%. In Whittlesea, it was 48% for women compared to 38% for men. And then again, if we compare that with an inner LGA such as Yarra, it was 30% for women and 21% for men. So the analysis consistently showed a greater proportion of tertiary qualified women earning less than the median income than for men, but the gap was greater for the growth areas than in inner areas. And again, that's the map for women. And then if we look at the pattern for men, we see quite different things going on there. So there's a lot of information in the data set and in the dashboard, and if you're into data and maps, you'll have a really great time playing around and toggling through that. So I'd really encourage you to take a closer look. Across all the indicators we looked at, it was largely consistent. So men and women in growth areas have a greater disadvantage in access to employment compared to the inner and middle suburbs, but it was much more pronounced for women in growth areas than for men. So we know from the data set that gender equity is a spatial issue across the city, and it's impacting on families, communities and productivity. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today about what does this mean for policy and what happens next and the way that we plan for the future in our cities. And I'm committed through our work that we do in public policy to carry this gender lens through in the thinking across all that we do and help to make women much more visible in public policy. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.